Okay, everyone, we're back for part 3, and we're going to discuss the Romantic era. What makes the Romantic era different from the Classical era is that a lot of the things that were embodied in the Classical era were sort of rebelled against in the Romantic era. So classical era was all about clarity of ideas, a lot of homophonic texture. In the Romantic era, we are really interested in the idea of musical storytelling, the idea of using a programmatic element to sort of uh, create the form or the structure of the work. So oftentimes a lot of the music from the Romantic era feels really cinematic. And in fact, early silent films really pulled from the Romantic era tradition for their original underscoring. So what we're going to hear is music that moves much more liberally. So instead of taking things in like one time signature for the entire piece, kind of like we did with Haydn or Mozart, we're going to use a lot of rubato, where we're pushing and pulling in time, where we might have like an accelerando, where we like push time for a prolonged amount of time, or a rallentando, where we do this the exact opposite, where we draw back our tempo. The idea is that there's like a lot of flexibility here and a lot of nuance and a lot of emotion. And that's a huge aesthetic divide between the Classical era and the Romantic era. So that happens in regards to rhythm, less organization in the Romantic era. Additionally, we start hearing extended techniques, like just a couple of them, generally pizzicato, or maybe moving the bowing positions from being maybe like a little bit more nasally to a little bit more clean sounding. So we're starting to be a little bit more nuanced in what we really want from a particular piece of music. Additionally, we are going to encounter a little bit more diversity when it comes to who gets to play the melody. So we've heard a lot of the first violinist, and a little less so in the Mozart, but like a lot of the first violinist being important. Still going to be important, but that head honcho role is kind of more equally distributed to the lower end of the ensemble, with like the viola and the cello. So the first piece that we're going to listen to is by Franz Schubert. We're going to listen to the Death of a Maiden Quartet, string quartet number 14 in D minor. So whenever you see like in C, in D, that denotes what key the piece is in. So in this case, D minor. D minor means that we're going to be in the key of D minor, which means that like the sonority that we hear most often is going to be a minor chord, something that sounds somewhat sad, and that of all of the note, or rather of all of the pitch classes that we have, D is going to be the note that comes up most frequently. It's going to feel like home to us. We're going to talk about this concept a lot later on in the semester, but just kind of wanted to soft introduce it for now. So things that we're accountable for: what's happening texturally, what's happening rhythmically, what's happening with the instrumentation. Instrumentation, we already know, it's a string quartet. So let's focus in on the other two ideas. Let's toggle over to the video. Okay, here we go. Diversity here, but still a lot of monophonic movement. All right, for all of these listening examples, definitely go through and at least listen to as much as I've covered, but probably more than that. The rest of this quartet is so great, very cinematic. We started out so moody, monophonic texture. We moved to homophonic texture, and then very quickly to heterophonic texture with a lot of call and response elements. We also have this kind of like pushing and pulling of time. It's in simple time, at least in the first 2 minutes are. And it's kind of like, you know, just giving a little bit of flexibility to something that would otherwise be mechanical. In addition to all of that, the Romantic composers were a huge fan of putting things that are opposite right next to one another. So we have a lot of really, really loud volumes next to really, really soft volumes. And one of this element of Romantic music ends up making Romantic music what I call elevator unsafe. So a lot of times I do what I call the elevator test in a piece of music. In an elevator test, I ask myself, would I listen to this in an elevator? And if the answer is yes, meaning like it's calming, it is probably the same dynamic, not too loud, not too soft, everything's kind of just in the middle, and the time signature is regularly repeating, that means that the piece of music is probably from the classical era or earlier. If the answer is no, it's probably from the Romantic era or later. So this piece fails my elevator test. It's a little bit too rambunctious. It's a little bit too all over the place. It's a little bit too cinematic, and it's a little bit too crazy, even though it's just instrumental music. It does not pass the elevator test. It's going to be from the Romantic era. Not a lot of extended techniques yet, but we're going to encounter certainly more of them. The first one that arrives on the scene, like I said, is pizzicato, plucking the string. We also have like some basic like tremolo. But what we've heard so far is it's similar in the trend of Mozart, but gone a little bit further. So we have more flexibility in tempo and time, more diversity in color within the ensemble because the melody is being given to the different instruments, not just violin one. So let's listen to this in regards to another piece from the Romantic era. This is by Claude Debussy. Okay, so we're gonna get to listen and watch this score. What's nice is before I even start it, we can make some assessments as to what we're gonna listen to. Our time signature up front, 4/4. Top number is the number of beats in the measure. 4, the bottom number stands in for a unit. 4 stands in for the unit of the quarter note. There are 4 quarter notes in every measure. So we're dealing with simple time. Notice that everyone here is more or less, for this system, with the exception of this little thing right here, everyone is in the exact same rhythm. That means the first event, much like the Schubert example, is going to be in monophonic texture. Notice that also everyone is marked with this symbol F underneath the staff. That means forte, to be played loudly. So immediately I'm going to say this piece already fails the elevator test. Yes, okay, that's all Opus 10, that's the other thing I wanted to talk about. So this is, again, early on in Claude Debussy's Opus catalog. His birth and death dates are up here, 1862 to 1918. So this is going to put him really in the late part of the Romantic era. The 20th century starts 1900. We have a number of different trends that we're going to listen to that are part of that era. So we already know our time signature, 4/4, but I'll show it to you. The next thing we have to decide is past this first system where we're listening to monophonic texture, what else are we going to be listening to? In this case, it's going to be a whole bunch of weaving back and forth between probably different textures, much like the Schubert. Like a better sense of monophonic, but really we're going to move to homophonic as soon as the violin one takes over this melody. There we go. We had a little bit of flexibility there. That's all rubato. Let it play for a bit. Cello has the melody. These three are one unit together. To monophonic like we were in the beginning. Homophonic. These viola and violin are acting together, violin 2 and cello are acting together. Violin's now melody, homophonic still is just a different kind of homophonic. Same thing, we only have one person on accompaniment and everyone, sorry, one person on accompaniment and everyone else for melody. time, but we are sort of pushing and pulling different tempos and rhythms. All right, I'll stop it there. This whole piece is really, really great. I cannot recommend it enough to listen to in its entirety. It's really like, just put it on. It's 25 minutes in multiple parts. Romantic era composers end up being a little bit more long-winded than classical era composers, but hopefully things that we heard in the Romantic era. More flexibility when it comes to moving between and among different textures. So a little bit more interplay, so then therefore a little bit more inclination to use heterophonic. We also, though, heard monophonic textures. So they're all about the idea of including a lot of dynamicism in a particular piece. And when it actually refers to dynamics, the musical term, talking about relative loudness and softness of sound, there's more opposing forces there, where we're dealing with loud and soft sounds that are right next to one another, or in general, not so much staying in the middle, but exploring the boundaries, the ceiling and the floor. So we also heard like the cello taking the melody for a number of sections. So even when we are in homophonic texture, we're giving the melody to other instruments aside from just the first violinist. Lots of rubato, not a huge sense of extended technique, but later on in the piece, there's a little bit of pizzicato and this thing called tremolo, where we're very quickly oscillating the bow against the string. We're going to hear many more extended techniques as we enter the 20th century, which is where we're going to spend our fourth and final section. We're going to listen to two composers, one from the earlier side of the era and one from the later side of the era by a composer who's still living. We'll listen to Bela Bartok and also a piece by George Crumb. So lots of furthering of these same sorts of ideas, but also a grand sense of experimentation that's going to be a part of part 4. So I will see you guys then.